All right, we'd like to welcome everybody to our monthly meeting of the Cahokia Archaeological Society. We meet here the third Thursday of each month, and hopefully whenever the Cahokia Mounds Interpretive Center gets open again, we'll go back to meeting there, but for the time being, we'll be meeting here at the Collinsville Memorial Library. And today, we've got a dual presentation. We got Forrest Joseph and Miles Cleveland. And they've been doing studies of the Eastern Agricultural Complex, variety of mostly seed crops and squashes. And they've done some experiments not only with growing them, but also with cooking with them. And Forrest will be giving the first presentation, Experimental Growing of Eastern Agricultural Complex Crops. He planted a number of crops, as he'll tell you, where the folks from SIU Edwardsville had excavations for a number of years. And we've heard about the Gehring site in previous presentations here. And he'll talk about the pros and cons of trying to grow these crops. And once he's done, then we'll have Miles talk about some of his menus for using those crops to feed the people who were living and growing them. So, Forrest, we'll have you start.
Well, thank you. Like you said, I'm Forrest. I did some research with the EAC crops in modern prairie. Now, I grew them down at the Gehring site at SIUE, which is the active site that we go to do field schools. And I was actually there that summer when I was doing this research. But the EAC is the Eastern Agricultural Complex. It's a set of plants that were grown by native peoples and started as common plants and weeds, and were grown and changed over time to become crops. The ones that I was able to work with were erect knotweed, little barley, sumpweed, and maygrass. And I was able to plant 3 of them in the spring and 2 of them in the fall. So my research question is really long. How much work would it have required to grow an Eastern Agricultural Complex garden, and how successful can these lost crops be in a modern prairie? So in the spring, I was able to set up 2 plots, and one was chenopodium and knotweed, and they were set together. The second one was plot B, chenopodium, knotweed, and sumpweed, which were in 3 different parts in the same plot. In the fall, I was able to plant 4 different plots all next to each other, and they were little barley, and wheat and maygrass. I had modern barley and wheat to kind of compare how the 2 different modern versus these past crops would grow. Oh, wrong way, sorry.
That's my fault.
No, all right, so in the spring plots, which are A and B, I did very, very minimal preparation. Me and my professors went out there, and we just turned over a little bit of soil, pulled out as much organic material as we could, and then we planted the seeds and put about a 1/4 inch of soil over the top of it. So very, very minimal maintenance, not a lot of weeding on this at all. I wanted to not be super involved with it. I wanted to see how it did against the prairie and the different plants inside of it. And so on the next plots, heavy preparation was done. These were placed over where we actually excavated the summer I was there, and that was to make sure there wasn't any plant material, anything in there anymore. So I figure this is the best chance of seeing how well these can grow if a maximum amount of preparation was done. So I was able to go out there bi-weekly to kind of check on them, make sure everything was going okay, and kind of get updates on like what was out there wildlife-wise, was it getting eaten, were they growing, and kind of monitor them. What was kind of interesting was when I was pulling down all the different grasses to place this plot here, I kind of ended up making a windbreak and almost fence area around this on accident, which is kind of cool because every time you went out there, it was very consolidated. It was like very out of the way, and you were like, oh, this is very interesting. Yeah, so then after that, okay, so you can kind of see here, I did some pictures of these different plants. This is maygrass, little barley, and then wheat and barley. And they kind of all grow at different rates. The modern ones you can see are growing very fast. These are all taken around the same time. So these are kind of different growth stages here. Pay attention to this little guy right here. This is important for later. This little clover guy. So expected, unexpected variables. In the spring, heavy rain. I did not expect it. And I think it kind of washed away a few of my plants, my seeds. So some of them didn't come up that we expected to come up. And then in the fall, of course, we had lack of rain. So I was always worried about not being able to get out there and there not being anything growing yet. The deer loved the barley, which was great because they stayed away from the maygrass and the little barley. So that was kind of nice. But it was interesting to see the deer came in. It's like, well, if I was out here growing a garden, you know, and the deer comes in, that's a great opportunity. But then invasive species, Sericea lespedeza, which is the one on the right there, kind of took me by surprise. I wasn't ready for it. And, wrong way again. Man, I'm messing up. Okay. All right. Sericea lespedeza is an invasive species. It was introduced by the government to be ground cover, erosion control, and for cattle to graze on. But the problem is it's very invasive and it leaches into the soil around it and kind of kills all the other plants around it. So it's very, very hostile to everything around it. And cattle don't actually like eating it. So there's a problem with that. So when it comes down to it, 3 of the 5 plants I had that season were successful. The maygrass and little barley grew well, and were able to outpace lespedeza, but this was also in the plots that I heavily made sure was good to go. The chenopodium grew for a while, but the lespedeza kind of choked it out as it went, and it started to disappear. Knotweed and sumpweed didn't come up much, and I think that might be partially because the rain washed things away, and maybe they needed to kind of sit over the winter and come back in the spring. So maybe they're out there now, but I'm not sure. But I think multiple gardens in different areas based upon the different plant types would be really, really helpful in growing these successfully. Okay. And what can be learned from this? I think that in a modern prairie, with invasive species like Sericea lespedeza, it's really, really hard to outpace it and keep up with it. So something like that needs to be looked at and controlled a little bit because it's kind of a problem in prairie settings. And every time I went out there, it was more and more. That's kind of a problem in general. But it's also interesting because I learned that when you're a farmer or you've got plants growing, like you're constantly thinking about it. I was sitting in class at work and I was like, when is it going to rain? I need rain. And I never thought about that before that. I was always like, yeah, farmers, you know, they live a normal life and nope, they're constantly worried about the rain and they're constantly worried about the weather. And so it became an interesting like thought process and understanding of what's going on out there. So yeah, I think it's interesting to put yourself in the mindset of worrying about food all the time and whether it's going to be there or not. But I also think that it would have taken a lot of work to have a very successful garden, and you would have had to prepare a lot in order to do so. So over time, they would have had to put more and more and more time into this. And just throwing them down there, it didn't work super well. So it would have taken a while to really take hold and be a successful, like, positive plant in the area. But yeah, thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
Was the invasive species that you battled there when this stuff would have been grown for indigenous people?
No, it was not. It was introduced in like early 1900s by the government and farmers to try and take care of some other issues. Sorry. So it wasn't around, so it wouldn't have been a problem back then. So these species may have been more productive back then and be easier to actually be successful. But there may have been other species that were more difficult back then too, that were more prevalent than we have now. So.
Were you using domesticated seeds or the wild varieties?
So the seeds we got were from Dr. Nellie Mueller from WashU, and she gave us some seeds that she's been doing some work with for a while. I think they harvested them wild originally, And that was, I think it's a couple, 10 years ago at least, something like that. And so there are a few iterations down the line at this point, but they're not wild, but they were pretty recently. So
I know when in the archaeological record, when we find the seeds, you know, there's a difference in size,
right,
the variety of the wild ones
mm-hmm.
as opposed to those that have been domesticated. I wonder how long it takes to domesticate.
Right, it's really interesting because yeah, I could even see it when I was looking at like the wheat or the barley that I bought from the store, right, and seeing that before I planted it was like very, very different, right? It was like very small compared to like, oh wow, this is like 20 times larger than these seeds are. So it's like, how long does it take to actually become like this really powerful, prevalent plant, you know? Yeah.
Did you use traditional tools or modern tools?
I didn't use anything super modern. I used like a rake was what I used to knock down kind of everything and kind of pulled it out by hand. And then I used a shovel also, but that's about as modern as it got when I was out there. But yeah, I tried to keep it very minimalist and not invasive in any way. So I didn't want to be too into the experiment where I was affecting it too much. So yeah.
Are you continuing that project?
I would love to, but I graduated. So I want somebody else to take it up and like try and keep it going. I know it's a big ask, but
They could get money from us. They could apply for our scholarship.
hey, that's a great idea. But I think it's really interesting work and it's really cool to look at and be a part of. But yeah, I was really happy to be able to do it. So
I would assume you use no chemicals or fertilizer, right?
I use nothing at all. And I didn't water anything. I didn't weed hardly at all. I did a little bit of weeding when I first realized the Lespedeza was killing my Chenopodium. And then I gave up on that. I was like, nah, I can't be too into this, but because I wanted to see it without too much human interaction, being around it too often. So. Yeah.
But I think it indicates that the natives were doing interaction.
Right.
Probably weeding and tending to these
for sure.
They were successful crops.
Yep. Yeah.
Did you quantify the yield at all, or
I was not able to get harvests from these. The winter came very quick and I was graduating, unfortunately. Like I said, I want somebody else to go out there and try and continue it, but big ask. So, anybody else?
I like what you said about, thinking about the weather all the time, because I would like to validate you that farmers do obsess about the weather. Like
Yeah.
it's their number one thought, their last thought, their first thought.
Yeah.
Weather things in every room to
Yeah.
listen to reports. So, yeah. And the idea that these people would have that on their mind all the time too.
Yeah. Yeah, it was constantly on my mind. I never thought that would be part of the process of like growing plants, but I was like, man, is it going to rain or am I just going to have to change my experiment or what's going to happen here? But eventually some rain came and it grew and I lucked out and had a good season. But, yeah, I wish I could have seen it all the way through because I really would have wished to like harvest them and actually maybe give them to Miles to actually use to make something for you guys to eat, but that didn't happen. So.
Good job. Thank you.
Does Miles have a positive?
I think he has one.
Okay, our next presentation will be Miles Cleland, who will be doing dinner at Monk's Mound, elite and everyday meals at Cahokia and the surrounding area. So he's taken some of these same kinds of crops that Forrest was just talking about and experimented with, cooking and looking how, what knowledge we have from later native groups, the kinds of food they were preparing with these kinds of seeds and other material. And he'll kind of give us a rundown on what he has found through his research. And he's also been a student at SIU Edwardsville. And he's also from Collinsville, a Collinsville native, and works with cooking in other realms as well, besides the the ancient species. So as soon as he gets his program up, we'll get him going.
All right.
Okay, Miles.
All right.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Forrest, and thank you to the Cahokia Archaeological Society for having me here. It's a great honor. And thank you, Bill, for the introduction. Like I said, my project was about studying the food that would have been eaten at and around Cahokia during the Mississippian occupation. So yeah, obviously we know what they were eating. You know, we have archaeological, macro and microbotanical remains that, you know, give us a pretty clear idea of what they were eating. But, you know, how it's prepared and what it would have looked like as food is an entirely different story. You know, it's one thing to say that Americans eat a lot of beef, but that doesn't take into account the number of different things that we do to the cow and what it ends up looking like when it's on your plate and you're eating it, right? So just here's a quick selection of the literature I used. Gail Fritz's Feeding Cahokia, obviously very important here about the crops that were being cultivated and eaten. Timothy Pawcattat's The Residues of Feasting and Public Ritual at Early Cahokia, also very important. As it says, it goes over some more maybe prestigious or rare foods that would have been eaten during ritual feasting ceremonies. Coyman and Albert, indigenous cuisine in the northern Great Lakes. This was more of a theoretical thing for me to use as a framework for my experiments, you know, defining cuisine, food as it pertains to ethnicity, time and space, that sort of stuff. I used two ethnographies by Gilmore and Bushnell. These are from the early 20th century, and they focus on tribes that are descendant from Cahokia. So obviously they're not really around here anymore, but they are tribes that had descended from Cahokia, and now they're living other places. And then obviously data from 11 NS99, the Gehring site, like what Forrest was talking about, the site that we had been excavating at field school for SIUE. It's a lot of information from the Mississippian occupation there that is very helpful. So just a little more on theory. Coyman and Albert define cuisine as food choice, food processing, food combinations, and cooking technology. So yeah, big part of this is recipe versus dish. You have the framework that you're trying to coax the food into, so to speak, and then you have what actually comes out of it, right? This project, very much experimental archaeology, right? I'm taking a look at archaeological remains, ethnographic records, and I'm trying to sort of bridge that gap to the modern day by recreating what it actually would have been like physically in person. So to start off with the ethnographic data, like I said, that Bushnell and Gilmore ethnography, as well as the Native American Ethnobotanical Database, a very useful online tool where you can search either by food or by tribe and find ethnographic records of how different crops were used. Very, very useful. So we got some Mississippian descendant tribes, obviously the Choctaw, Pawnee, Ponca, Omaha, the Osage, which I forgot to put on here, of course. And going through these ethnographies, I found, you know, this is the common denominator here. Lots of corn, right? That's pretty obvious. It would be ground, left on the cob to dry and then ground up, used in stew like you would with grits. Deer, venison, smoked over a wet fire. Wild herbs and spices, mint and anise are the two big ones that I saw a lot. Squash, sunflower seeds, nuts and berries, all sorts. Basically anything you can think of that grows in the area, they would have eaten it. Black walnut and hickory are the two big ones, and then berries, strawberries, elderberries, mayberries, that sort of stuff. They'd eat them fresh, dried, or in sauce. And then wild allium, so that's onions and garlic. Again, a lot of that. Wild onions are, I can confirm, actually pretty good. It's a bit of a hassle to go harvest them. But so on to the archaeological data. You can see here, this is a map of the Gehring site and the excavations that denote Mississippian occupation are in blue. So we have 2 houses here, a couple of fire pits, and going off of the data that was excavated from these sites, again, a lot of corn. Just so much corn. Black walnut and hickory nut again. And then chenopodium was the big one, but there was also a lot of other EAC crops present. But we found that, at least at the Gehring site, by the Mississippian period, according to the data, the EAC crops had fallen out of favor in favor of corn. So they were eating more corn compared to EAC crops at this point. And other stuff, grapes, hazelnuts, and sassafras. This is another important piece of archaeological data here. So this comes from the Cahokia article, and it deals with a borrow pit, or a pit that would have been dug to get earth for the mounds outside of Mound 51, very close to Monk's Mound. So you can see, wish I had the laser pointer. You have Mound 51, it's right next to the Grand Plaza, and then there's Monk's Mound up there. The sub-mound pit is basically right behind it, and the theory is that, you know, they dug out this pit to have dirt for one of the other earthworks in the area, and then before they filled it in, it was, they basically used it as a trash pit. So it's theorized that because of its proximity to the Grand Plaza and Monk's Mound, that it was used for feasting refuse, or what Cahokia refers to as elite delicacies. We see a lot of deer, a lot of fish. The literature I read shows that Cahokians actually ate deer and fish at a fairly even rate, although fish was much more bound by seasonality. Lots of corn, again, common denominator here, squash, EAC crops, sunflower seeds. The big distinction between this site and the Gehring site was the presence of these fruits. There was a lot more fruit, and there was a lot more variety. They had things like strawberries, plums, and persimmons, which is one that really kind of caught me off guard. And then nuts, black walnuts, and hickory nuts yet again. So here's a quick Venn diagram. This shows the ethnographic foods, the archaeological foods, and then we have the overlap there in the middle. So we have deer, fish, corn, acorn, black walnut, hickory nut, sassafras, sunflower seed, squash, and strawberry. Method. So you can see here, I wrote up basically a quick recipe for what I ended up cooking. I basically just looked at the ethnographic records, looked at how these descendant tribes were making these foods, and kind of extrapolated a recipe out of that, and then incorporated the archaeological ingredients as they would have been eaten at Cahokia. So essentially, I made a common stew. This would have been a more everyday sort of layperson food. Pretty much, you know, ground up corn, black walnuts, sunflower seeds. I smoked some venison to put in there. They would have been smoking it for longer term preservation, wild mint and anise and wild onion as well. And I pretty much put that in a pot and covered it with water and cooked it until it was done. Very, very simple. And then for the higher status, elite feast ritual stew, very, very similar sort of framework. You know, they would have been eating a lot of stew. And the ethnographic record shows this, you know, it's easy to cook relatively over a fire in a large pot, and it's easy to share with a lot of people. So for the feast stew, I decided to use hominy, just to have a little bit of variety in comparison. The common stew, still the corn grits, most of the same ingredients, although this one I did add the squash. I did not smoke the venison. Instead, I just cooked it in the pot with everything else. And then to go on top of the stew, I made a strawberry and plum sauce. And again, the ethnographic record points to them having, one of the uses that they would have for fruits is that they would blend them and have them in a sauce to eat with other foods. And here's some pictures. This is me cooking the common stew. I got the nuts and the spices here in the mortar and pestle. Very sort of plain looking there. I found that for a modern palate, it was very devoid of salt. I did not put any seasoning, no salt or pepper, nothing that would have been not been available to people during the Mississippian occupation. So, like I said, I found it wanting for salt, but it has everything that you need: protein, fat, carbs. If you are hunting, gathering, farming, mound building for 8 hours a day, I would enjoy having that for dinner. And then for the more elite, I suppose prestigious version here, like I said, similar sort of structure. Put everything in a pot, cook it until it's done. Not too complicated there. And then for the sauce, I did use a blender. I know it's not period accurate, but I don't have hours on end to be pounding fruits with a mortar and pestle. So, and then you can see the end result over there. The sauce drizzled over the top. Just a couple of ethical considerations in doing this. Of course, it is pretty speculative in nature. Despite this being my best educated guesses, we can't know for certain that this is how they would have eaten these foods. And also, it deals with ethnographic data, so there is a certain reverence that you need to have with that, making sure that you're accurately representing these people that are being studied. And so something that I had wanted to do before my presentation, the timeline didn't quite work in my favor, but my professor that I'm working on this project with, and we were working with a local potter who is making some Mississippian pots, and we're going to try to recreate some of these recipes over a fire, or hot coals as they would have done, using those pots. So you can see just how difficult it would have been, because I'm almost certain that it would be a lot harder than using modern materials. Here's my works cited. Again, mostly what I mentioned earlier. This is just boilerplate for my senior presentation. And that's it. Any questions? Yes.
Sounds really cool.
Thank you.
In future iterations of this, you probably could add salt, I would think, because I think people would have access to like salt lakes and salt deposits through
Okay.
networks. So maybe it would be less one concordance.
Yeah. Yeah, no, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anything in either the ethnographies or the archaeology that would suggest that. I have no doubt that they would have access to salt, but it's just not something that I had really considered given the stuff that I had. Yes.
There are salt springs and salt seeps throughout southern Illinois, southeastern Missouri especially, where we have found vessels, they were evaporating the salt.
Oh, wow.
And so it was accessible. Maybe not everybody had it all the time. It was probably a very prized commodity. And,
Yeah.
as you say, for a little flavor to it.
Yes. Yes, Norma.
Yeah, also in regards to salt, there's an inland salt marsh at Dupo,
Oh, wow.
and there was a significant site there. I'm aware of woodland and Mississippian sites in that area, so they may have gotten salt from there.
Yeah.
And like Bill said, salt cans have been found. I was wondering, are there any modern Native American recipes that kind of coincide with what you came up with?
I haven't looked a lot at the modern recipes, mostly because I do know of a couple of contemporary Native like food cultural and patrimony movements, but they are all pretty distant from here. It's usually stuff in either in the Pacific Northwest or the Southwest, pretty much anywhere that's not here. So I haven't looked into that. Yes.
Another possible source of salt is the Canopodium stems.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I was just reading something from Virginia, ethnographic account of use of the Canopodium stems for salt, and I think some of the relatives of Canopodium
Interesting.
can be used for that too, and have been in the Southwest and Eastern.
Is it just they draw sodium out of the soil, or how does that?
Yeah, they're very salt. They collect. They're salt tolerant, and they concentrate salt in their stems and leaves. But I think when you're trying to process them from the plant, it's, you get more from the stem. But I do agree that salt, maybe just for special people and for special purposes,
Yes.
it was available.
Yes. What I'm learning here is clearly I have more research to do about salt. But thank you. And unfortunately, I did want to include some EAC crops in this. Unfortunately, like Forrest said, the timeline really didn't just add up. And not to poo-poo your farming abilities, Forrest, but I don't really know that we would have had enough to do much with anyway. So
There are some varieties of marshelder, I think, that are kind of peppery too. That
interesting.
Have a little spice to them. So that's something that might. I'm sure they found things to add that through experiment that you'll have to do, I guess.
Lepidum is called pepper grass, even though it's not a grass, and it has a very nice peppery taste. Yeah.
There's even some of that by one of the borrow pits by the Cahokia parking lot. That borrow pit there now, and I found it.
The pepper grass.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good to know.
good.
All right. Yes.
What is the, sorry if I missed this between the two presentations, what was the time period for that site that you have speaking to field school?
I think it was, what was it? It was middle to late woodland and then Mississippian. So yeah, I can go back here. Here, hold on. Come on. So this map was provided to me by my professor, Dr. Koyman. The blue, as I've said, is the Mississippian, and then the red you see there, I believe, is middle woodland. So we found a lot more Mississippian there than we have middle woodland, but they for sure were there earlier than the Mississippian period.
And I should mention that he has brought a pot of
Yes.
stew over here.
Yes. So if you are interested, I did bring some of the feasting stew here along with the sauce. I have it back there in a crock pot. It's been staying nice and warm. So I don't know if you have any other business after this, but once we're done here, feel free to come on over and try it out.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anybody that came in a little bit late, we do have an attendance sheet that we passed around. You'd like to get your information, your name.